All right, y'all. Well, it has been a minute, like we said. We're back in the saddle, and we got our good friend here, Sam Say today. Hey, yo, it's been what? I don't know. We couldn't remember if it's been a year or two since we had him on the show, but he always brings the heat, the whole heat, and nothing but the heat.
Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright.
And so he wrote a kind of a nice, mild, meek article, gentle, just fluffy. Makes you all warm inside. A couple weeks ago that we wanted to talk about today. But yeah, we're gonna pull him in just 1 second here. So he recently got married, and I think you have moved. Is it to Ohio?
Yeah. I've moved to Ohio February, I believe, and was to get married. It's been three almost 3 months now, and I was saying to you guys earlier, it's been incredible. It's been a huge blessing. So
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, we kind of have followed y'all's love story. I think when we first started chatting with you, I can't remember what phase y'all were in, if it was just dating or engaged, but it's always a journey. It's a fun thing. So just excited to hear that. I see she had a website too, which was really cool, like to inform parents, I guess, on different. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah. My wife's name is Annie. I almost said Annie Pasma, her maiden name, but it's Annie Say, which is weird for me to get to. People always call us the Says. I'm like, the Says, who's that? Oh yeah, that's us. But but yeah, so she created a service called Library for Kiddos. Sorry, for Library for Littles. I'm combining that because she has different groups within it, and one of them is called Library for Kiddos. But really, the entire service is called Library for Littles. She used to work as a kids librarian at a library, so she's since moved on from that and she's become a teacher. But she has a huge passion for libraries and for helping kids and especially parents. So she created this service to help parents discern what books they're reading to their children. A lot of times these authors or publishers, they're very deceptive in what they're writing. They seem innocent, but then given her experience, she's able to discern it well, and then just to instruct parents on what to avoid, which books not to read, and then which books to read. There's some good books out there, of course, coming from even unbelievers too. And she spends almost all her time. Right now, actually, she's out in the back in the patio reading a book that she'll be reviewing for parents. So it's a really great service that many parents and children have been benefiting from.
That's amazing, man. We definitely come a long way from green eggs and ham these days to what they're giving these kids. So that's a great resource. Well, yeah, man, super excited. I know you have been working like in the pro life space now for a while. I don't know how many years, but you have been laboring, and I think to all of our surprise, this summer, we saw what was leaked out of the Supreme Court. We're like, man, if there was any hope of things changing, this is probably going to put a squash on it, because I didn't have a whole lot of confidence in our justices. I did in a few of them, like Clarence Thomas, like
Yeah.
I know he rides hard. So, but there was a few of them. I was like, man, they ain't
Yeah.
gonna come through now. But I think
Yeah.
many of our surprise, it happened, and it dropped seemingly out of nowhere. I was at Liberty University that morning doing a I don't even remember, it was some kind of fair where people were coming, and somebody next to me told me. I was like, wait, hold on, let me check that out and make sure that's true. And it was true, and we were all kind of just having this, I don't know, euphoric kind of
Yeah.
surreal moment. How did that hit you, and what was going on for you when that dropped?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. In the morning of, I was actually, my wife and I were getting ready to go to a pro life group here in near Columbus. They had invited me to come speak to their interns that day, not knowing, of course, that it would be happening, that Roe v. Wade would be overturned that day. I was going there, preparing to go there to encourage the interns, the summer interns, on just the pro-life issue, pro-abortion issue, to warn them about the social issues that will threaten their passion for saving babies. And then also before that, we were planning to go to Planned Parenthood to protest as well with these interns. So as I'm getting ready, I'm in a washroom. I'm trying to get my beard all nice. And then my wife just opens the door with this huge smile on her face, and she just shows me the news, and I celebrated and yelled so much around the house. I was jumping around, and she was also happy. But then she's like, "Sam, like, you're much more excited for this than you were for our wedding."
Oh my. Wow.
I was just,
Yeah.
and I'm a pretty, even keel. Not much gets me really excited. Of course, I was very excited about my wedding. I was very, very happy. But I was more kind of taking it all in when I was getting married. But with this, very much like you said, I did not think it would happen. To me, it really is. That day I kept thinking about the Bible verse from Paul, where he says that God is able to do far more abundantly than anything that we can ask or think.
Sure.
We knew that it would be overturned at some point, but I didn't think, honestly, it would be at the time before the next 20 years. And especially with all the threats and the insanity that was happening around this issue, I thought that all the or most of the justices, besides Clarence Thomas, because as you said, he's not fazed by anything, I thought that they would back down, but they didn't, and I praise God for that. It's to this day, it's just like, wow, Anyway, so yeah, that was my reaction that day, and then of course I went to the Created Equal, the pro-life group in Columbus that I was scheduled to be at, and we were just celebrating together. And there were these guys. The president, his name is Mark Harrington. He had been fighting Roe v. Wade for decades, and just the jubilation, the tears of joy, it was incredible.
That's amazing, man. I can't imagine for you and our friend Ryan Bomberger, who's been working in this space for a while, just what that must have felt like. Because for us,
Yeah, it took our breath away. I was like, what? That's got to be a misprint. This can't be true. And I just like, wow. I didn't think in our lifetime we would see. But, it was such a fierce reminder for me that God is on the throne. God is still all powerful. He can do all things like the scripture you mentioned, above and beyond what we can ask or imagine. Okay, so with your article, you start out kind of saying, we shouldn't be surprised if we notice that a lot of Christians are not rejoicing, particularly woke Christians are not rejoicing over this. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I said we shouldn't be surprised because there were already arguments, indirect arguments for abortion by a lot of these so-called woke Christians without being explicit about it for some time. And I had been warning about this actually in my articles or social media posts for some time. I think in the article I mentioned it that one of the biggest indictments against the woke movement or critical race theory movement or so-called justice movement within the church is that it had been leading many of these people into apathy or support for abortion. So once Roe v. Wade was overturned, it did not surprise me whatsoever that people who had been embracing these critical race theory concepts, who had been oftentimes talking about the intersectional oppression happening, that they would point to, well, this is going to primarily affect poor women, it would affect Black women, because they had shown they did not value justice or human rights, but that they were valuing the intersectional critical race theory arguments for that since certain so-called people are marginalized in society, they therefore need certain privileges, even if it leads to discrimination against babies. It is okay for them to have these oppressive oppressive laws in place, of course, dealing with abortion. So it didn't surprise me whatsoever because, of course, critical race theory, as it become very popular amongst woke people, is inherently unjust. It supports discrimination. It supports, feminism. So with that in mind, I was actually surprised that so many people were surprised by the reaction from these woke Christians.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I guess, connection there that people don't often get between, like, what is the connection between being pro-choice, supporting critical race theory, supporting feminism, and it really it's all like part of this giant conglomeration that really does, like, conceptually they fit together. It's a coherent framework, but I think that's what, and you were right to be surprised that people were surprised. But I think it just shows us that people still don't understand this worldview that really is one of the main competitors to Christian theism right now. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about, maybe spell that out for people that don't know why is that connected to feminism? What is the oppression matrix that's going on there that's causing that support?
Yeah, there's a lot to say there, and I think it is always helpful to start with just the conflict theory aspect, the Marxist concept of the oppressor versus the oppressed. That is what, Marxists or critical race theorists or generally woke people, they believe in this framework that there is the oppressor and then there's the oppressed. Throughout history, Marxism develops into critical race theory, which is basically, as James Lindsay calls it, just race Marxism, which is that, because basically Marxism claimed that the essential conflict in society was between the poor person and the rich person. Critical race theory says the essential conflict is between white people versus non-white people, or specifically white people versus black people. Critical race theory develops this concept also called intersectionality, which basically says that there are different kinds of oppressors and oppressed people in the world. So they would say that Marxism, the original Marxism, was right in that there is class-based discrimination going on. There's also, of course, there's also race-based discrimination going on in society. But then there's also discrimination against women, discrimination against, gay people, trans people, things like that, happening at the same time. That's all relevant because with all this in place, the goal then is to create something called equity. And equity is really the key phrase for all of these ideas. It's really the end goal. And the reason why feminism plays a big role into all of this is, of course, is because with intersectionality, you have to subscribe to the view that if Black people are oppressed, and then if women are oppressed, then Black women uniquely are oppressed in society. That is a anti-racist or anti-patriarchy framework. All of that is attached to the response to Roe v. Wade, or Christians supporting, or I would say so-called Christians supporting Roe v. Wade, in that if you believe in equity, as they all do, then the goal is never what is right, what is just. It is always the outcome. It is always equality of outcome. Therefore, if you deprive, in their minds, if you deprive a woman from having an abortion, you are then therefore depriving them from having the equality of outcome that they need to have in order to be, in order to be so-called equal with men, or specifically white men, because again, in their minds, this is going to primarily affect Black women. So, with all this in mind, with equity, so I think in the article I quoted I quoted Ibram Kendi's word. I always want to do that because many people are shocked when they read those words, which basically, I'm not sure if I'm getting ahead of myself with mentioning this, but he basically says in the article in his book, that discrimination is only wrong if it leads to inequity, as in if it's not leading to equality of outcome. But it's good, racial discrimination in his mind is good if it leads to racial equity. So it's therefore okay to discriminate against a white person if it leads to equality of outcome for Black people. Well, that ties with abortion in the sense then that with feminism, even if the baby is a baby, even if preborn babies are human, it is therefore okay to discriminate against the human, against the preborn baby, so that the women, especially Black women, would have equality of outcome, so then that they can have the same outcomes as men who do not have to get pregnant or have babies. So equity, which is really, again, the fundamental view of all this stuff. It's really socialism or communism. It's really the driving force behind why so many so-called woke Christians have embraced abortion or support abortion.
That's helpful. And you cut out for a second when you said the name. It was Ibram X. Kendi, for those who are listening, if you missed that. And what he's saying is he wrote many books, but I think some of the more popular ones are Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist. How to Be an Anti-Racist was one of the most popular books, along with White Fragility from Robin DiAngelo, around the time of the George Floyd, #1 and #2 on the bestseller list. So these books have made major impacts, even on the Christian world. If I'm not mistaken, you can correct me on this, Sam, but I think even Jamar Tisby, a Christian writer, was partnering with Ibram Kendi to some degree, at some level. But his book is really interesting. Like, he really does argue what seems crazy and is crazy, but he tries to make sense of that idea that discrimination is good if it's bringing equal outcomes. And that makes sense. Now, the way that it's impacting the Christian world, you pointed out a few really interesting quotes in this article, and I want to read a few of them here. This is one from a guy named Dante Stewart, and this should hopefully wake people up who don't know Christianity today is not really Christianity today anymore. It hasn't been for a while. But you say he's a regular writer there, and this is what he wrote. He wrote, "What makes me most sick is that Christians will celebrate and believe that God made it so." And here he's talking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He said that it makes me most sick that Christians will celebrate and believe that God made this so. No, this is not God. It is years of Christians waging religious war. It is not about protection, love, or morality. All of this is about one thing only: power, period. White power, period. And I can imagine, like, if you're not accustomed to the woke language, like, you'd probably just laugh out loud at that and be like, I don't even know what planet is this guy on. But once you understand kind of what you laid out, it begins to make sense. Oh, he's just following the logical implications of this larger view that he's already bought into. And it causes him to make, this might be pressing it too hard, but he almost seems to be making a distinction here between God working and human beings working, which we know scripturally that God often, if not most of the time, works through human beings. So this kind of like dichotomy that he seems to be drawing is just theologically like 101 error. But then on top of that, he puts a negative side on the Christians that are waging war against, I would say in a good way, against the forces of darkness. He puts it waging war on minorities for the sake of power, for selfish gain. And again, this guy's a regular writer at Christianity Today. Just put that in your mind. You went on to quote this. Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Can I say one thing about that? Just to give people an idea as to where this thing is coming from. I'm just preparing to do a lecture, and I am talking about intersectionality. I always struggle to say that word. So it's intersectionality. There you go. And that quote is so important that you read from Dante Stewart. And it reminds me of, I don't know if you guys can see it well, this book that I'm reading, White Christian Privilege. And I think I said it the last time I was on this podcast, in that a lot of genuine Christians don't realize the real fundamental the real enemy for woke people. It is exactly what Dante Stewart said. It is really Christians. It is not white people. It is Christians. Really, whiteness, when they talk about whiteness and power, they're really talking about what they describe as Western ideology. Western ideology, which is very much influenced by Christianity. So we oftentimes hear white privilege. Okay, it might make sense to us, white privilege. Well, the next real major opposition that we're going to receive is from woke people against Christians. So Dante Stewart, who would claim he's a Christian, it's interesting that he's even saying that, well, it's the other guys, it's the Christians who are doing this, because he himself is identifying himself with the non-Christians, with the woke people, which is really a religion in and of itself. But Marx said that religion is the opium of the people, and that he despised Christianity. He was really an atheist because he understood that his views could not be reconciled with Christianity. So when they talk about power and white and privilege and all these things, let's be careful. Let's be examining, discerning what they're really driving at. And as you said, they see a distinction between God working and the people of God working for him. Well, they hate power, and they especially hate the power of God. They hate the authority that God has on justice, including on the preborn baby. They want to give all that power to the so-called oppressed people, which in their minds they believe is against God's views on justice.
Wow.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well said, man. And you picked a range of people here because you picked him from Christianity Today. Some would kind of put that in the big Eva element of Christianity. This one you did from Michelle Higgins isn't surprising. I think she's on the Truth Table podcast, which, if I'm not mistaken, it came to you on. That's so far. It's hard to even put that nowhere to put that in a Christian category. But she said, "Dear Black Christians who support reproductive justice and believe that abortion is health care, it's time to be more vocal in the places where we have been shamed, even if those places are the ones we call home." Can you break that down a little bit? What is for people that are in the pro-life movement that don't really read this stuff, that what reproductive justice, they probably heard that term, but how did the left make that stick at all?
Well, the left loves euphemisms to hide what they're really trying to say. If they say, they've said pro-choice, and this is the new term they use a lot, reproductive rights, which is really a way to claim that we're trying to have authority on someone's body, on someone's reproductive, rights. Well, but it's been said by many people, being pro-life we're not saying that people cannot reproduce. We're saying, no, you should. To have reproductive rights means then that you have the right to reproduce, which people have. And I want that. But to kill your baby after they've been reproduced, after you've already exercised your right to reproduce, is not an exercise or a practice of course, reproductive rights. But they say this because they want to hide what they're really saying with abortion. Abortion kills an innocent child. Abortion kills a preborn baby. It kills a baby. But they can't say it that way, or they won't say it that way, because then they know that for you can perhaps deceive a very immature Christian with those words who does not know anything about abortion. So they will phrase it that way. But if you say that, yeah, well, I want the right to kill a baby, that's hard. That's hard to really get away with. And that's why they tend to use these kinds of phrases.
Yeah, that's good. And that's something you really got to be on the watch for, is discerning Christians, like you said, and as you mature, know the language, know the tricks. It's an old playbook, but they continue to use it.
If you want to grow in your confidence in knowing what you believe and why you believe it, if you want to ground your faith in biblical Christianity and step into who God has called you to be, I want to tell you about a great program put on by Impact 360, and it's called Propel. Propel is a one-week transformational leadership and discipleship experience where high school students gather together to be grounded in a biblical worldview as they learn how to follow Jesus, have a godly influence, learn how to disciple their peers, and boldly live out their faith in their daily lives. So they're having 2 sessions this summer. The first one is June 19th through the 25th, and the second one is June 26th through July 2nd. These programs fill up really quickly, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. So we'll put the link below if you're interested in looking into it, and we'll see you this summer.
So in this third quote that you gave, it's from a pastor and I guess a regular contributor to the Gospel Coalition, a writer for the Gospel Coalition named Micah Edmondson. And he wrote, "May the Lord give grace to victims of rape whose pregnancies are daily reminders of the worst violation. May the Lord give grace to women whose lives are at risk in their pregnancies, and to medical providers wondering if they can intervene to save their lives. Lord, have mercy. May the Lord give grace and strength to struggling families, and especially to those who cannot see a way forward. Lord, have mercy on every bruised reed of a person. Lord, have mercy." And I think this is like something that we've come to expect really from the Gospel Coalition. And it's, I kind of always say it's the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. But what do you make of that? They're not really taking a pro-choice stance, but it's kind of a tricky approach to how you would approach this thing of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and this is your response. What do you make of that? What category do you put that in?
You know, it's interesting. I don't want to speculate too much, but following some of his other tweets and some of the things that he's liked, some of the social media posts, at least on Twitter, that Micah Edmondson liked, and knowing that his wife is a member is one of the 3 hosts of the Truths Table, I think it's more than just mere speculation to say that he might say he's pro-life, but I wouldn't say that he is, according to what he said on social media and some of the things that he's liked, that he is really pro-life in a biblical manner. But what I will say in response to this is there are a few things that's wrong with this. One, he is not rejoicing over this. The Bible, and I mentioned this, the Bible says that when justice is done, it is joy to the righteous, and it is terror to the evildoer. So I'll let you make out what I think that means in light of a pastor who is not rejoicing at a Supreme Court ruling that is going to save 100,000, well, more than 100,000 babies. Already, I mean, I'm in Ohio now. As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, as it happened in many other states, it triggered a heartbeat bill in Ohio, which effectively bans almost all abortions in Ohio. Which, of course, is not enough. We want to ban all abortion in Ohio, but this is saving so many babies in America. And for a pastor who's supposed to love justice would react with mourning, and would have, frankly, the audacity to say, "Lord, have mercy." God has had mercy, which is why Roe v. Wade has been returned. I will apply to some of the things that he said. He mentioned that, may the Lord give grace to victims of rape whose pregnancies are daily reminders of the worst violation. I'm actually planning on writing an article about this. And rape is a horrific violation. I can't imagine what that's like for many people to not only be, to suffer that kind of assault, but then to be pregnant from that, which should make it all the more difficult. But it's not the worst violation. I don't say that to make rape a light issue. It's not. I know people who've been assaulted. I know it's incredibly difficult. I know there's a horrific violation, but it is not the worst violation in this context. assaulting a preborn baby to death is the worst violation. And for a pastor to use that, that wording here would suggest then that it is okay for a victim of sexual assault to then be manipulated and be motivated to assault their own baby to death. Abortion from a sexual assault does not remove the original assault. It only creates two assaults, that it kills or assaults a baby to death. So that there is wrong. And then when he also talks about, may the Lord give grace to women whose lives are at risk in their pregnancies, and to medical providers wondering if they can intervene to save their lives. That is an incredibly ignorant thing to be saying. Abortion is never, which he seems to be implying here, abortion is never, ever justifiable to save a mother's life. This is a fact.
Can you say that statement one more time, Sam? Because you cut out. Abortion never what?
Oh, I'm sorry. Abortion is never, ever justifiable or necessary to save a mother's life. So people oftentimes will bring up two scenarios. They'll bring up ectopic pregnancies, or which leads to surgery. Well, the surgery to save the mother there is not an abortion. Abortion is the intentional killing of a preborn baby. Ectopic pregnancies, which happen early in pregnancy, is basically when a baby, ends up, heading towards the fallopian tube, and they will not survive. And now they're threatening a mother's life. So then there's a surgery to save the mother, but unfortunately, since the baby is so young, they're not able to survive, and then they're not viable, and they die. That's not an abortion. He's liked tweets and shared tweets, this pastor, Mika Edmondson, suggesting that ectopic pregnancy surgeries are abortions when they are not. And also, there's preeclampsia and other pregnancy complications that happen late into pregnancy, which can threaten a mother's life. But when that happens, abortion is not necessary. Abortion will actually only harm the mother and, of course, definitely kill the baby. Because in a late-term abortion, you need about 2-3 days to in order for the doctor to have the abortion, which again will kill the baby and potentially harm the mom, because the mom is waiting 2-3 days anyways. And of course, with baby being at that age, it's actually more threatening to the mother's life. But you can have a C-section, which you can do right away, which will save the baby and save the mom. So you never, ever need to have an abortion to save the mother's life. That is just medically, it's not true at all. But here's a pastor pushing these pro-abortion talking points as a way to share his supposed grief that this will harm people. Well, Roe v. Wade is meant to protect people, meant to protect babies from being killed. And, his reaction was very, very concerning. So it's framed as if it is from a pro-life person who really is caring about his neighbors. But frankly, I think he's not caring about his neighbors, because he's pushing lies and he's pushing ideas that will only lead to babies being killed.
Wow, that's an interesting analysis, man. I appreciate that insight, because I didn't know much about this person, where they're coming from. But when you said their wife is a regular contributor to Truth's Table, I was like, oh wow. So because you do get the impression when you read this that, oh man, here's someone who's just trying to care for the vulnerable in the midst of this thing. But once you find out that information, you actually looks like more what's presented in that movie Enemies Within the Church, where you have sort of infiltrators that have a different view, and they're trying to soften things or push it in a subtle way, pushing it to the left. And in this case, even not so subtle. But you see this hidden kind of agenda where there's assumptions behind what he's even praying in this, what seems like a lament prayer in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned. Where couched into that is this idea that abortion save lives and all this kind of stuff. And so that's an excellent analysis. So yeah, you ended this article, with some pretty strong words. You said, nevertheless, woke Christians who support abortion have become friends with the world and enemies with Christ. They've become enemies with vulnerable preborn babies, enemies with the pro-life movement, enemies with real Christians, and especially enemies with Christ. Therefore, and this is the part, what woke Christians who support abortion need most isn't pro-life arguments. What they need most is the gospel. That's a pretty strong statement. Is that you still feeling pretty good about that one?
Yeah. I knew that many people perhaps would not be so troubled by what I said in terms of the reasoning, at least the first reason being that the reason why a lot of these so-called woke Christians are supporting abortion is because, of course, of critical race theory and the intersection of equity and everything. But I knew that what I would say at the end would be seemingly harsh for many people. I don't take any pleasure in saying that, but the reality is, if you support abortion, you think it's okay to kill innocent preborn babies, you are directly against God. As I said, the Bible says that when justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous and a terror to the evildoer. Therefore, if you are deeply troubled and upset and angry, and you are opposing justice, you are an evildoer. You are not part of God's kingdom. You are not showing a repentance. I think the next article that I wrote after that, I mentioned that there are some Christians out there who've had abortions, and they are repentant over that. But any mention of that, troubles them, not because they support abortion, but because they are grieved by their own abortion history. That's understandable. Anytime I hear about my old sins, I'm not happy about it. It troubles me because I know that without the grace of God, I would stand condemned, and I know what I've done. I know that I've sinned. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about people who've had abortions. In fact, I can say this. I know there are Christians, genuine Christians, who, because of their hearts being hardened and because of unbelief, who've had abortions and they've repented. Whether you had an abortion when you were a Christian or whether you had an abortion before you were a Christian, if you repent and you believe, you are my brother and you are my sister by the grace of God. I mentioned in a later article that the most important person about someone who's had an abortion, if they've repented, it is not what they did to their child. It is what God did to his child for them. All right. It is that we all are forgiven sinners. However, whether you've had an abortion or not, and you actively support the murder of preborn babies, you are directly saying that God is not the author of life. You're saying that a person or a mother is the author of life, and you are then against God. And Christ says that you are either with me or you're against me. And so, I think I mentioned in the article, to be pro-life is not, so to be pro-abortion is not merely deviating from justice, it's deviating from Jesus. Because Jesus is very clear on these issues. So I wrote those words because I want people to realize what this is really about. This is not whether you are pro-life or pro-abortion. That matters. But it's really about whether you are pro-Jesus or you are antichrist. It's really that simple. And for many people, they're not thinking about this, that what you believe about justice really affirms what you believe about Jesus. And if you believe that Jesus is the author of life, that he is the one that gives and takes away, he's the only one that says it's now time for you to die and to receive judgment. If you believe that, you don't support murder. You don't. But if you support murder, then you're not aligned with Christ and you're one of Christ's enemies. So that is why I shared those words. And I really wanted to bring people like me to remember that we're not just dealing with politics here. We're dealing with souls. We're dealing with people who are lost. And we need to be preaching the gospel to them so they can believe like we believe.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. And the kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about here today, because I don't know that I would put this next group of folks in the same category as the people who are pro-abortion and woke, but they're kind of the Christians that weren't, and many of them are leaders, well known. They weren't super comfortable just celebrating the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and there's kind of a range here as well, but the essence of their approach to it was, hey, yeah, we celebrate pro-life, but we celebrate pro-life from womb to tomb. We're not like these kind of crazy white supremacist right-wing Christians that are out in the street right now celebrating. We understand it's a whole life ethic. And then some of them went as far as to say, hey, if you're not supporting these gun control measures, then you're not really you're not pro-life in a consistent way. What do you say to those kinds of approaches?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that, because that really troubled me. And frankly, it affirms just how many people's minds have been calloused because of sympathies for critical race theory and woke ideology. The worst thing, as I said before, the worst violation anyone could do in this world, the worst violation is to murder a preborn baby. And if you would not rejoice that thousands, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try and get emotional here, but that thousands and thousands of preborn babies are going to be saved and rescued from being brutally murdered. For my work, I've had to watch a lot of videos of what really happens to babies when they get ripped apart, when their skulls are crushed and they are suffering. This happens to 1 million babies. And now, because of Roe v. Wade being overturned, hundreds and thousands of preborn babies will no longer have to. There were people who were appointed to die by Planned Parenthood, who, because of Roe v. Wade, they survived. And you, as a Christian, your mind is now so callous because of woke ideology that you would not go on your knees and raise your hand to celebrate God's mercy. That you would say, hey, well, don't rejoice too much, guys. We need to give people more money so they won't kill their babies. Really? Is that how callous we become now? That you cannot rejoice in justice? That you now have to compare the murder of preborn babies to people receiving more checks in the mail? Frankly, especially when that in of itself is also an injustice, right? The reality is this, that all of this pro-life from womb to tomb is really just saying, well, we're not okay with babies being killed, but we think it's just as bad that you have people who do not have paid maternity leave, that you have people who do not have $20 minimum wage, per hour, that you have people who do not have free health care. Really, you'd compare all those things to babies being murdered, especially when those things in of themselves are actually unjust. We don't talk about this stuff, but it's really unjust. I'm from Canada, and the free healthcare, first of all, it's not free at all. They're taking it away from wealthier people to give to so-called all people, right? That if you are making a certain amount of money, they would take more from you so that they can give to others, which of course is an unjust. So it really troubles me that many Christians have become so apathetic, really, to abortion, that yes, they may not love abortion, but they've become so apathetic to it that they would think to rejoice in that is almost wrong, since they support, frankly, socialism. It really troubles me. So I know many of these guys are not like the people that we've mentioned. I know that they are against abortion, but what is it about woke ideology would tempt you into not rejoicing as you should over preborn babies now being rescued because of Roe v. Wade. So, but again, as I said before, I've been warning about this for some time, that woke ideology is making us more apathetic. If you are a Christian, of course you won't support abortion. But if you are a Christian, you can be made to become apathetic about justice, and that's what we're seeing here with a lot of people saying that they want to be more pro-life from womb to tomb, especially when the pro-life movement is the best thing that's ever happened to mothers in terms of when it comes to the issue of justice. I have volunteered at many crisis pregnancy centers where they will save a baby. They save thousands and thousands of babies, and they help the moms. They give them counseling. They give them financial assistance. They give them protection from people who want to harm them, their husbands or their boyfriends. They're helping these ladies, and yet you would say that, well, they're not really the socialist movement, which says it's okay to kill your baby, but it's also just as important that we give you socialist, promises and socialist so-called benefits, and that you would say that those two things are identical in that way. It really troubles me. So I'm sorry, I'm probably saying too much, but
great.
I'm. It's really frustrating to me that Christians would be vulnerable to these ideas.
No, I think how you said that was actually perfect, man. It was spot on. And even that description of being vulnerable to these ideas, because I think with many well-meaning folks that was their knee-jerk reaction that day, they just, man, it's that pressure from the woke culture around us that makes them feel like, oh man, I better virtue signal. And for many of them, they feel like in that moment that sounds good. But what you said is exactly right. That's what that pressure does to us. It makes us make a false moral equivalency between something that really is a great, great injustice and wicked before God versus something that not only is it not positive and it's not morally equivalent, it's actually another form of injustice, like you said. It's a socialist policy that runs against God's views of impartiality and stealing from other people to give to other people. And then at best, you have some cases that are just bad policy that end up causing more harm than good. Did you have something to add to that, Sam?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned virtue signaling, because that's really what it is, which really suggests that for many people, they know it is good to rejoice that preborn babies are going to be saved, and have been saved from abortion because of Roe v. Wade. But the reason why they weren't rejoicing is because they were thinking of what people might think of them if they were to celebrate. They were thinking about feminists. They're thinking about woke people. They were really fearing man more than fearing God. And that in of itself, again, goes to show the danger, the destructive nature of woke ideology, which says that you should be a respecter of man, that you should fear God, that you should worry about what other people think of you instead of what God thinks of you.
So powerful.
So good. Well, thanks so much, Sam, for coming on here, man, and setting the record straight, keeping us in line. What's going on with you guys with your ministry? How can people connect with you? How can they support you? All that kind of good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, people can support me if they would choose to. Patreon. They can support me there. They can pray for me. I need all the prayers I can get. And it's now that I've moved to America, I've left my pro-life work in Canada, which was really, really hard. And I'm going to be involved in the pro-life movement here. But for now, I'm just my blogging, social media work is my full-time job. So if they could pray for me, that would be because now I'm a husband and I got to take care of my wife. So they would pray for me that I would be able to lead her well, and that if they would choose to, they can support me as well.
Awesome. Well, we would encourage our listeners to do that for sure. slowtowrite.com. You can look him up on social media too, man. He's always just bringing great material. You have a way of putting these big ideas into these short little phrases that really capture just truth in a poignant way. So thank you, Sam. And man, we'll hit you up in the future again, I'm sure. And blessings on you guys and your endeavors.
Thank you so much.